Welcome to another broadcast of the Deborah Ruffini Show on the Artist First Radio Network. All past shows are archived. You can find them at artistfirst.com. And now, from England, here she is, your host, Deborah Ruffini.
Greetings from England and Happy New Year. This is Deborah Ruffini with another broadcast of the Deborah Ruffini Show. Today it is my great pleasure to be speaking with Peter Murphy, who will be sharing with us his life story and where that has consequently led him. Peter, it's a joy to have you with us. Thank you so much for being on the show. How are you doing?
Thanks for inviting me, Deborah. It's good to hear your voice.
Oh, you're easily pleased.
Yep.
Oh, as I mentioned to you before, I think the overseas, the American voice is a novelty for myself, so it works both ways.
Yeah.
I think
I usually visit Britain 2 or 3 times a year, and I haven't been able to do that since before the pandemic. So it's particularly good to hear your accent. It feels like home.
Oh, does it? I'll have to put on a dialect. What sort of dialect? I could do a London geezer.
Yep. Yep. Theatre. Yep.
Oh, that's great. Oh, yeah, it'd be good when the world is a bit as normal as it can be, and then we can do these things, can't we? It'd be good.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and we can come. I'll take you for lunch. We can have somewhere. We can for a cream tea, a British cream tea.
That would be lovely. Yeah, that'd be terrific. They don't have anything like that here. They have meatball subs and which I love, and all this other good food, but nothing as fancy as a cream tea.
Oh, well, you're missing out. Oh, crumbs. Yes, it's about your due time to come over here. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Oh, so yeah, Peter. So you write a lot of poetry, don't you?
I do. I started writing poetry for some crazy reason when I was about 15. 2 things came into my life at the same time. One was poetry. I somehow fell in love with poetry, and the other was drinking.
Okay.
And I thought I fell hard for both of them, and thought, okay, this is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And because I didn't know anything about poetry, I hadn't read any poetry, but the stereotype is that a poet had to be a drunk and had to live this fabulous life. I decided that was perfect. That's what I would do. So
yeah.
I made the stupid decision at 15 that I would do both of those. And then a couple of years later, when I was 18, I guess, I decided I had to make another decision. And that decision was that I could either be happy or I could be a poet. I didn't know you could be a poet and be happy.
Oh, that's interesting.
Again, I didn't know any poets, so I decided I'd rather be a poet. So that led me into other things that led to great unhappiness. Let's put it that way.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I suppose we tend to think, poets are kind of, when we get an image of a poet, they're sort of sitting under, they've got a kind of forlorn face, and they're not exactly doing cartwheels, are they? They're sitting with a pen and deep in thought.
Right, and again, it's the stereotype, and certainly it does require a lot of thought and solitude to, I think, write poetry, but there's nothing to do with being unhappy. The world is doing its best to make us unhappy. I think we need to create our happiness and share as much as we can with others. So, but I was young and silly, and I learned more once I got out into the world and straightened out my life and stopped drinking the alcohol that plundered me into so much of that sadness.
Are you able to share with us what the root cause was for drinking? Because quite often anything to do with like I don't like to use the term substance abuse, like with drugs or drinking. Some things usually we take these sort of things to numb our thoughts and numb what's really going on inside of us. Right.
I started writing a memoir about 10 years ago with the specific reason of trying to figure out why I was so screwed up in those early years. Why I didn't realize I was that screwed up until I became older. I realized, okay, not everybody was drunk most of their time in high school. Not everybody flunked out of 3 colleges when they got out of high school, and not everybody went into this sort of, I guess I call it my early life. While I was in high school, I call my early derelict period. After high school, I call mid-derelict period, and then when I traveled back to Britain, specifically to Wales, where I was born, I call that late derelict period. And I wanted to find out why that happened. Why was I so different and relying on alcohol so much?
Yeah.
And what I came up with were, after really examining my life, were 2, maybe 3 big incidents.
Okay.
The first is my mother died when I was 7,
Oh, sorry.
And I didn't know why she died. She was a young woman. She was 33. My father said she died of lung cancer.
Yeah.
And she smoked, so I figured, okay, that makes sense. I found out years later that she committed suicide, that she overdosed on pills and alcohol deliberately. The second is that after my mother died, we got my brother and I got shuffled off to a number of various places and various public places. Some was a home for children and various relatives, and then finally almost settled down. And then a priest, the local priest, the popular priest, started to abuse me sexually for about a year. And I was 11 years old, and because I believed very strongly in heaven and hell, and believed literally everything that I was told by the nuns and by the priests, I thought that what he was doing couldn't be wrong because he was a priest. This is like God doing it to me, but yet I felt it was wrong. So I somehow, I don't know what the psychological term is, but disengaged from that and thought I was going to go to hell despite this. And years later, I think that when I was 15, 4 or 5 years later, I think both of those sort of, I couldn't bury them. They came out again, and that's what happened. The third thing is that I lived in New York City at the time, and it was a very tough neighborhood, and there were a lot of gangs at the time, and I was kidnapped one by one gang when I was maybe 9 years old, 8 years old, I don't remember exactly. They kidnapped me for a day and tortured me, and then left me stranded. And I realized as I was writing this novel, gee, I don't think that happened to everybody.
Yeah, sure.
And then a couple of years later, another gang caught me and they had a gun cocked to the back of my neck and marched me along a highway near John F. Kennedy Airport, JFK. And I thought I was going to be killed. And for some reason, some guy stopped his car and said, "Son, would you like a ride?" He must have seen what was going on. I don't know what it, but he was like a saint, an angel came in and saved me.
Yeah.
But I thought that was it. I'm going to die at 12 or 13, whatever I was.
Wow.
So it was a challenging childhood that to me was just normal because that's how the world was. So when I discovered drinking, it was a great way to, not really feel what I had been feeling, not feeling that kind of angst, not feeling that kind of pain, physical pain. There's not so much physical pain, though that was part of it, but emotional pain, and it made me feel almost human, if I can use that phrase. Because I believe so much in the heaven and hell, for part of that time I thought I was in hell. I thought I was living in hell.
Yeah.
And then I figured, okay, if I'm living in hell, my logic went, then I must have died somewhere on my own line. But I didn't know when I died or how I died.
That's interesting.
But I thought I was dead. And there's a cartoon that was popular in America at the time called Casper the Friendly Ghost. I don't know if it made it over to Britain.
Oh, yes, yeah.
But Casper is the ghost of a little boy who wanders around looking for friends.
Right.
And I thought I was going to be like Casper, that I would never be able to find people that loved me. I would just go from place to place and, look for friends, and everybody would look at me and see that I was a ghost, see that I was dead, and be terrified of me. So that's, I guess, how I saw myself, that I wasn't really part of with other people. I was something other, something that wasn't good. And so when I started drinking, that made me feel, okay. I wouldn't say it made me feel good, but it made me feel better.
Yeah. I can understand that. I can relate to that. I was trying to think on YouTube a couple of weeks ago. I don't know what. Sometimes it comes up recommended for you, and it's got absolutely nothing to do with what you've been viewing. But it came up with I think it was a channel that was linked to this thing that I was seeing, and it was is it called Kensington Avenue, a popular place in Philadelphia, and it's kind of like a long road.
There might be. I'm close to Philadelphia. I know there's a neighborhood called Kensington. I don't know a specific Kensington Avenue, but it makes sense that they would have one there.
Oh, right. Or maybe it's a little place called, maybe it's called Kensington, I'm not sure. But it's like, wherever it's like a long road filled with drug addicts. And it's very, very sad because I think so many people can turn up their nose. Oh, for goodness sake, look, why don't they pull themselves together? But if you look at the pain and you think, crumbs, there must be a real tragic story behind the vast majority of these lives. You can just see they are, people in such pain. And it makes sense to sort of. I once knew someone who was homeless, and she was an alcoholic at the time. I think she went on to become a counsellor, but she was homeless and an alcoholic at the time. And she said to me, imagine being on the streets and sober. And I thought, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And so I hope no one judged you for that. Did you feel judged at that time by anyone?
I felt judged by everyone.
Did you? Yeah.
pick anybody, because I was I just felt that I was in so many ways just inadequate. I didn't feel I was a bad person.
No.
I felt I was good. I was trying to do good. I was trying to be good, but
Sure.
I was a screw up. I didn't know how to do things. I wasn't successful at anything at that time, and my secret life was writing poems. And I felt that's what makes me something.
Yeah.
That makes me different from everybody else, because I didn't know anybody else that did that.
Yeah.
And that sort of saved me. And then that carried through. And when I mentioned earlier I wanted to do it for the rest of my life, I was lucky enough to be able to. That became true. I made a life out of writing poetry and then teaching poetry to others and teaching writing to others. So
Wow.
it literally took me from one place to another, physically, geographically, and guided my life in many, many ways.
That's great. That's awesome. It's awful to think awful things happen to good people, but encouraging that it takes those awful things to bring a person to where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And that's clearly in your case.
I wonder if I could read a poem to you, if that would be
I'd
okay.
love that. The audience would. Yes, we would love that. Peter.
Okay, it's a poem. It's a poem I wrote. I didn't really face my alcoholism or my early youth until I was in my 30s.
Okay.
And I had been sober at this time for maybe 15 years and started to get drinking dreams.
Right.
And they scared the hell out of me because I thought I was done with that. I thought this was a part of my life I wouldn't have to face anymore, but they became more intense.
Yeah.
And so I decided, rather than getting up in the middle of the night and going out looking for a drink, I would write about it. So this is a poem based on a grim fairy tale. When I read this fairy tale called The Stubborn Child, I said, my goodness, that's my life. And it's one of probably the shortest grim fairy tale there is. It's just a few lines.
Oh, wonderful.
And what happens is a little boy is fidgeting, and his mother tells him to stop fidgeting or God's going to strike him dead. Well, he was a little boy. He continued fidgeting, and God struck him dead. And he's buried in the backyard, but he continues to fidget in the backyard. He sticks his head up above the grave until his mother comes out with a stick and yells at him and hits him with the stick. And the fairy tale ends, rather than he lived happily ever after, the way most fairy tales end. And then he had peace for the first time beneath the ground.
Wow.
And I thought of that, and that's when I wrote my own version. And I wrote it in the third person. But in my version, when my mother dies, she takes me into the grave with her.
Oh,
And I
okay.
think of that as a metaphor that sort of happened, because I mentioned earlier that was probably the most traumatic event of my childhood, is when she did die. So
Yeah.
this is called The Stubborn Child.
Great.
His mother had taken him into her grave, where he continued to fidget. Quiet down, she yelled, or we'll get no peace here too. But his arms kept lifting and falling, and his legs moved back and forth in perpetual dance. The boy wanted to please his mother, who loved him, who always gave him the best of what she had, but he could not find comfort in her grave and continued to wander through those sleepless years, his skinny chest surging as if it was still a home to breath. You're not dead yet, are you, little boy? She screamed, and smacked him with her bony hand and chased him with a kitchen knife around a small compartment. She shoved him with her thin right arm so hard, he popped right out of the grave he had been trying to live in, and lay weak, half blind and covered with earth. The dead smells on his skin made the small boy dizzy. When he tried to walk, he fell, and he cried each day for years to live without stumbling. He does not mention any of this to his daughter, who sleeps her stubborn sleep each night, as he stands in her room and prays through her restless years, waving his arms above her, sweeping and stirring the immaculate air.
Wow. That you have quite a gift, to say the least.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's crumbs. That's powerful stuff.
Yeah. I worked on that poem for quite a while, but it didn't feel finished until I brought in my daughter. And at the time, my daughter was maybe 6 or 7 years old. And I was trying to figure out, what happened. And I realized one of the things that I was most terrified of as a parent is doing to my children what had been done to me. Or, doing, not that my parents were horrible people, but they just weren't prepared. And I just didn't want to make the mistakes that they made.
Yeah.
And what I decided is that, okay, let me do my best not to make those mistakes, but realize I'm going to make mistakes, but make new mistakes. Traumatize my daughter in new ways, not the ways I had been. So I hope I was successful. She's a lovely young woman.
Oh.
And she has her problems and her life, but I think she always felt loved, and she still does. So I think that's important.
That's important, isn't it? I mean, I'm not a parent, but I can imagine if you've gone through a certain thing yourself, as a parent, I can understand how you'd be adamant for your child not to go through the same thing. That makes sense. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you're a great daddy. Wonderful
I try.
Daddy. Yeah.
I'm trying to be a good grandfather now too. My grandson just turned 3 years old, so that's a whole new world. That's just lovely, but.
I bet. Yeah.
The energy, my goodness, where does the energy come from?
It must be interesting to see parts of yourself in that, even if it's things like mannerisms or gestures in your something that's come from you. That must be quite an. I often wonder how that must feel. That must be, and also grandkids.
Yeah,
everything's passed down, isn't it?
About the poem, The Stubborn Child. Shortly before I wrote that, maybe I don't know if it was a couple of months. We had an incident. It may have been the first night before my daughter went to school. I don't remember what grade it was. And she's lying in bed, looking up. I'm kissing her goodnight, and she's very pensive, very serious. I said, "What's going on?" And she looked up and she said, "Daddy," she was probably 6 years old. She said, "For the first 6 years of my life, I've been doing what you and Mommy want me to do. From now on, I'm doing what I want."
Really?
And that terrified me. Fortunately, when she woke up the next day, she didn't remember that. But I think that was probably running around in my head when I worked on that poem, and I had that line, "She sleeps her own stubborn sleep."
Yeah. Wow.
Because, that part of me, I think, I was never that eloquent at that age to be able to discern that, but just the idea she was so certain that she wanted to live her own life, and which she has. Yeah.
That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. That's this sort of awareness from such a young age.
Right. But I think that also got itself into the poem when that happened there. So, I'm grateful that she did that. Otherwise, I'd still be working that poem 35 years later.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you must indeed thank her for that. Going back to something that I personally feel quite strongly about, and it's up to you, Peter, whether you want to, go along these lines or not, with the priest who did the horrific things to you. Is we place our trust in adults as children, don't we? Even though we have a sense of something isn't quite right here. This isn't right. This is a grown up. We're supposed to trust them. We're supposed to think that everything they do is correct. But something's very wrong here. And when you add a priest on top of that, it's like tenfold confusing and wrong. And how did you cope with that at the time? What were your feelings with regard to that?
It was I was very conflicted because I was taught every day. I went to 4 different elementary schools because we moved around so much. But 3 of them were Catholic schools, and I probably was in a Catholic school at the time. And I just believed hook, line, and sinker, literally, everything that was said. Let me tell you a little story that we were told, is that when I was about to make my first Holy Communion at age 7 or 8, we were told not to touch the host when it was placed in our mouth with our fingers, just use our tongue.
Okay.
And then one of the nuns told a story that there was a bad boy who took the host out of his mouth and put it in his handkerchief and took it home. And he locked his room the door to his room, and he wanted to see if this was really the body and blood of Christ. So he tore it apart, and the blood filled out of that host and drowned him. That's what I was told, and I believed it.
Oh.
I believed that was going to happen to me. And so I was in terror for most of my life, thinking I was going to go to hell.
Yeah.
For a period of time, I went to a public school when I was in second grade, and at that time in the United States, they had prayer in school, in the public schools. It was just like in the Catholic schools, but the prayers were different than I had in the Catholic schools. And I figured, okay, I don't know what a public is, but it's obviously a new religion. It's a different religion than the Catholic religion.
Yeah.
Because it was a public school versus a Catholic school. They said prayers, But the thing about the publics that made me confused is that the Catholics talked about hell and how to stay out of it. The publics never mentioned it.
Oh.
And I was terrified. I was in that school for a year and a half. I was terrified I was going to go to public hell without knowing what I did wrong to get there.
Oh, yeah.
So this whole concept of public hell was, even more terrifying than the Catholic hell.
Oh, yes, I can understand that. Yeah.
Because at least Catholic hell, I knew what the sins were.
Yeah, you knew how to avoid. Yeah, exactly.
So when the priest, how it started was he invited me back to the rectory where we wrestled.
Right.
And this happened every Saturday, and it went on for months and months. I don't remember exactly how long, but it went on. It wasn't just a few times. It was week after week, month after month. And after the first few times we wrestled, he let me win in the beginning, and I thought that's great because I was a little boy and he was a very large man. But then he started to win, and he had me. I'm going to be somewhat graphic here. He pinned me to the floor, and I remember lying on the this very old, mildewy woolen carpet, looking around at the furniture on the wall as he wrestling. And he started wrestling dirty, and he started putting his hand in my pants. And I thought, oh no, Father Smith wrestles dirty. How can he do that? He's a priest.
Yeah.
And I just felt very uncomfortable. And as it went on, week after week, I felt more and more, this is wrong. It's a sin, but he can't be the sinner because he's the priest.
Oh.
So I have to be the sinner. And they had confessions in the afternoon, so I would go to confession. I mean, he would wrestle me in the morning. In the afternoon, I would go to confession, confessing my sins.
Oh, that's awful.
And I didn't even know how I confessed that. What did I say with that? I don't even know. But I did it every Saturday because I was afraid I was going to go to hell if I died, in the week. And I figured I wanted to die. This is really another thing that was really awful. I wanted to die right after I went to confession because I knew then I would go to heaven.
Yeah.
But if I waited like a couple of hours, I would probably sin again, do a mortal sin of some kind, and wind up going to hell. So Saturdays were like my best day of the week and my worst day of the week. The worst day because I had to wrestle with Father Smith, or he would wrestle me, and then I would go to confession. So if I died then, I'd make it to heaven, and that was certainly more important than I was told in the class at my Catholic school. That was more important than anything that happened during my life on Earth. So again, this impacted how I looked at things. Now, several years later, I guess I was about 11 then. I guess about when I was 15, I was talking with some other kids, and one of them said, "Hey, did you know that Father Smith was queer?" The language at the time, and I said, "No way, it's impossible." And then I got flooded with all of these memories of what he did week after week, and I was thinking, "Oh, that's what that was."
Yeah.
Because I didn't understand it at the time. I just knew it was sinful and dirty. And I didn't tell anybody about that until I started writing about it 20 years later, when I was in my 30s. I felt ashamed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that happened around 1960, 61.
Right.
He was finally caught in 2002. That priest, he went from parish to parish and did the same thing to many, many boys and girls. And, he just kept getting transferred. It was one of those atrocities that the church did.
So there's a lot of covering up. There was an awful lot of it's awful, isn't it? Rather than the guest on my last show, we spoke about this sort of thing, about the church covering things up rather than saying no, right, out. Right. The institution became more important than the people who were serving. Yeah. You can understand people turning away from religion. I think it's a horrible word, religion. Relationship with God is beautiful. Religion is very ritualistic, and the whole thing about like the whole thing about having to go to confession. I know once I went to Italy, and I think it was probably, I'm assuming it's the Vatican, and there were all these sort of confessional boxes, all different languages, and I just remember thinking, how bizarre that you've got. We need all these different languages to, and also we need a moderator. We can't go straight to God.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
You had to go to another man to confess something that someone else was guilty of.
Right.
It's just madness, isn't it? And you think, I wonder if would the real God please stand up? You know, is he just sort of? I mean, he must be shaking his head in shame, mustn't he? Oh no, these people are representing me, trying to.
Yeah. No, I can see that. Yeah.
Pretending to, rather. Yeah.
From a historical point of view, I can understand it. The need for clergy because of the people weren't literate, and it was a way to for people that those certain people that were trained to read, at least the Bible, that they then transferred those stories that how to live to those who couldn't. But then it became this institution, as I said, that became more important. Pardon me, than the people who were serving. But there's certainly, I mean, people do read today. We have one world. We can travel any part of the world in 24 hours and be someplace.
Yeah.
Pre-COVID, anyway, and hopefully post-COVID.
Yes.
And we have universal education for the most part. There are certain parts of the world and certainly parts of my country where education isn't that great, but it's a different world than it was 2,000 years ago and 1,000 years before that.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? And, you get a lot of Christians sort of saying, God never changes. And you think, well, but the times change. And you think, well, yes, God must change because there are certain things that, I'm trying to think of an example of, we have an internet age for a start, so God must change with times, because if God was still stuck in however many thousand years ago, we've got a problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and think of all of the wars and all the people that died in the name of religion. And it's again that God would be hanging his head in shame. So that led me, of course, to becoming, I didn't know the language at the time, agnostic. I just didn't know that word at the time, and then eventually not believing in God, because how could this be a God if this is what was happening in his name?
Yeah, I get you.
I was going to a Catholic high school at the time, so that didn't help.
Even more to take on with that.
I made my way through it. Then I made the mistake of going to a Catholic college right after, and that was the first of the colleges I flunked out of. And that was pretty much because I was drinking, pretty seriously at that point. Yeah. So it was hard to read.
Yeah, I guess, and it's the more things that are piling on top of you, I guess the more escapism you would wish to have.
Mm-hmm. But I did have a brilliant idea. I was proud of this at the time. After I flunked out of the third college, I decided, let me be near what I love, so I went to work at a bar.
Excellent.
So it was a nightclub in Queens, which is a section of New York City, and it was a very popular place. Had a band, live music every night, rock bands, and I was a bartender there, and that was, I was hot, for that period of time. And I had rules. I didn't drink while I worked, so that was a big rule. I drank coffee. I didn't drink any alcohol on the job.
Yeah.
And that was what I described earlier as becoming mid-derelict period. And I had blackouts when I was drinking in high school, but they became much more frequent when I was drinking there, because I drank every day.
Yeah.
Pretty much I get off work depending on a day shift or a night shift, and it was I didn't just drink. I mean, I was drink to get drunk, because why else bother?
Yeah, sure.
So what's the point? Some people just like have I never understood that people would just sort of have a drink to relax. I never ever understood that. That doesn't make any sense. You want to relax, lie down, take a nap.
Yeah.
No, you drink to get drunk, and that became that was normal. And the only plan I had, I was trying to come up, what am I going to do with my life? And I had absolutely no idea.
Yeah.
But I knew that I needed a job and a decent living, because the only thing I could plan was my liquor cabinet. What was I going to have in my liquor cabinet? So at 20 years old, 19 and 20 years old, I was planning, okay, well, I need this, I need that. I don't like rum, so I don't need rum, but I do need vodka, I need scotch, I need this other stuff. And, what kind of, I need to make a certain amount of money in order to have my own place, my own apartment or something, and to be able to feed the liquor cabinet.
Yes, yeah.
So that was my career path. What was I going to do to get there?
Wow. So, what were you going to do to get there?
I didn't know that. I never figured that part out. Eventually, I got in trouble. I got in a lot of trouble. Got involved with a woman who was in more shape than I was. She came into the bar, and it was beautiful. She was an amazingly beautiful woman, and she could dance. And, I mean, her dancing was charismatic. I didn't know she was a professional dancer.
Okay.
I didn't know that when I saw her on the floor. I certainly found that out. But she had just come out of a psychiatric hospital where she kicked her heroin habit.
Right.
And so I taught her to drink. So we became an item, as I described, a broken item for about a year and a half.
Mm.
And that became just a very, very negative. I mean, we were negative for each other. I mean, I'm not putting her as the villain. I was as bad for her as she was for me.
Mm.
But eventually, I got tricked into becoming engaged to her.
Oh.
And this is a graphic story. I don't know if you like. I can be a bit more graphic here, if that's okay.
That's absolutely fine, yeah.
Okay, so she had an apartment in the basement of her mother's house.
Mm.
And her mother was going away. I'm putting that in quotation marks for a weekend. And so she decided she wanted to make love in her mother's bed.
Okay.
And I thought this was a bad idea, but, you know, I was in love, I thought. I went along with this.
Yeah.
And so we're going at it, and her mother comes in and, quote, catches us, unquote.
Oh.
And starts crying and screaming, and, you know, I trusted you with my baby and all this other stuff, and the girl starts crying, and they're both saying, and you're not even married, blah, 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 even though the mother knew we were, you know, downstairs doing it every night, but that's beside the point. So anyway, I just, all right, goddammit, I'll get married. And then all of a sudden, they're both smiles, they break out the champagne, they have a wedding list of who they're going to invite to the wedding,
Hooey.
they have a wedding hall all picked out, they planned this. And they, as I said, tricked me into, you know, getting engaged. And I just felt like I was a horse in one of those old cowboy movies that had been lassoed and broken by the cowboys.
Yeah.
Another thing that happened is she got me, this is going to sound ridiculous, but go along with me for a moment here, in debt for $1,000 to a mafia-connected dentist who she didn't repay, and I was the one who set this up. So I was the one who had to repay this, and I guess it was 1970. I didn't have $1,000, so I kept getting these threatening phone calls, and I didn't know what to do. I thought my legs would be broken or something.
Yeah.
And so I did what a man does. I ran away.
Best things that know.
I literally fled the country. I fled the United States, and I was born in Wales 20 years earlier. But I didn't know anything about it. As I said, my mother died, and she was the Welsh connection. My parents met during the war.
Yeah.
My father was a GI, and he stopped into a pub in Newport, Wales, where he fell in love with the barmaid. And they got married after the war, and that's where I lived the first few months of my life in a pub.
Okay.
And so I didn't have any connection with the Welsh family, but I went to Wales. I thought, let me just go for 3 weeks. And in that 3-week period, maybe things will calm down. Well, when I got to Britain, I was in London, and I realized nobody in the entire country knows I'm a screw-up. Nobody knows who I am, and maybe I can change my life.
Right.
I stayed almost a year. I didn't go back.
Yeah.
I didn't contact anybody. I just stayed, and I hitchhiked around. I did find my family in Wales, and that was wonderful.
Yeah.
And they loved me. They didn't criticize me. They just they took care of me. They fed me. And then I hitchhiked around England, around Wales, around England, around Scotland, and eventually wound up in Northern Ireland, where I got involved in a shooting incident right before Bloody Sunday when I was hitchhiking through Londonderry. And that became important. I mentioned earlier in our conversation that poetry had literally taken me from place to place.
Yeah.
I had never heard of the poet William Wordsworth. Maybe he was taught to me in school, I don't know. But I was in the Lake District just for a day, hitchhiking through there. But I heard that it was beautiful, so I went to, see what it was like.
Yes.
And I met a shepherd, and, we're talking. He said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm a poet." I mean, I don't even know why I said it. It was ridiculous. And he said, "Do you know our poet?" I said, "What's his name?" He said, "William Wordsworth." And I said, "No, I never heard of him." So I said, "Why don't you go say hello? He lives down the road."
Oh.
This was in Windermere. It was in, I don't remember what town it was. But anyway, Grasmere was about 3 miles down the road. So I went down to see this poet, William Wordsworth, and maybe he'd give me a cup of tea. And then I saw a sign when I got to Grasmere that said Wordsworth's Cottage. I said, "Oh no, this guy has a sign. He must be important." So
Pretty much.
I show up at Wordsworth Cottage, and the woman answers, I knock on the door, and the woman answers, and there's like a little shop, and I'm confused, and the woman is behind the desk there, and I think, so that must be Mrs. Wordsworth.
Oh.
So I'm looking around, and I see that, okay, it's a bookstore, and I pick up over the books, I see that Wordsworth had died in 1850. And I said, oh no, he's one of those dead poets that I don't like. I'd never read a dead poet, never read him, but I figured I didn't like him because he was old.
Yeah.
And I decided, I realized that shepherd had tricked me. I thought the shepherd was stupid because he was a shepherd, but he actually was smarter than I was because he tricked me good. So I picked up a book of, the cheapest book they had there, William Wordsworth's poems, a little sampler.
Yeah.
I took it back to the youth hostel I was staying in, and I read it, and everything changed. I fell in love with Wordsworth.
Oh.
I fell in love with the poems, which was so crazy because they were nature poems. I didn't know anything about nature. And I particularly fell in love with the poem Lines Written About Tintern Abbey, which happened to be in Wales, not far from where I was born.
Yeah.
So rather than staying in the Lake District for a day, I stayed there for 3 weeks.
Okay.
And I hitchhiked around from place to place where Wordsworth had written about, and I kept reading his poems over and over again. And then I decided, okay, I need to know more about this Wordsworth guy. And I thought, maybe I need to go to a library.
Yeah.
And I wasn't the kind of person who went to a library, but I thought maybe they have books about Wordsworth and his life and what other people say.
Yeah.
So I figured, all right, let me go to Edinburgh. Because I figured there'd be a library up there. So I hitchhiked to Edinburgh, and I was there for a week. And went to the library every day, and I learned more about Wordsworth's life and this other guy named Samuel Taylor Coleridge. I was his friend and co-writer in many cases. And I met another American who had just come from Ireland, and he had some coins he couldn't use, some Irish coins, so he gave them to me.
Yeah.
So I figured, all right, let me go to Ireland, and I'll go to Limerick. You know about the Limerick poem, the little 5-line verse,
Yes,
the nonsense poems.
Yeah.
And I figured I'll go down to Limerick and find out about the Limerick, and so poetry led me there. But the ferry from Scotland in Stranraer, just south of, I can't think of the name of Scotland, big city up there, not Edinburgh, the other one, Glasgow. From Stranraer, I took over to Larne in Northern Ireland, and all of a sudden, I come down the gangplank, and there are soldiers holding guns. This was December 1971, and there was a war going on. I didn't know that. I was so out of it and so drunk, and I was sort of terrified. Okay, more people holding guns at me. So I traveled around Northern Ireland for a bit and wound up in Derry, in Londonderry, where I was hitchhiking, got a ride with a couple of people in a milk truck, and they were very upset. They were cursing when we got to each of the roadblocks. There were roadblocks all over the city, and they would curse at the soldiers, and I thought, this is stupid, because they have milk cartons and soldiers have guns. This is not a good idea to curse at them. And we're at the last of these roadblocks before heading out of the city. They were going to take me to the Irish border, and some kids across the street started throwing stones at the soldiers. The soldiers lifted their rifles, and the guy driving decided to take the fire, so he races through this roadblock. I don't know how he did it, and I don't know if guns went off or not, but in my imagination, or really, I heard the gunshots go off. I don't know if they were shooting at the kids, shooting at us, shooting in the air, or maybe they weren't shooting at all, but they went off in my head.
Yeah.
And I was terrified. I had guns, as I mentioned, pulled on me before, but nobody ever actually shot. And then they let me off. I ran over into the border, and then I had my first original idea. I was 21 at that point. I just turned 21. And my first original idea in my entire life was, why are we killing each other over religion, especially over a God that doesn't exist?
Yeah, yeah.
And then it went further. Why are we killing ourselves over our nationalities and our races? We're all human beings. Why can't we see that?
Yes.
And I knew this was an original idea, and I was the first person ever to think of this, because I'd never heard it before. So how could it be out in the world? I was so proud of myself for thinking of something nobody else in the entire world had ever thought of.
Yeah.
Of course, many people had thought of it, but that would have required me knowing something more about the world. So I made it down to Limerick, and then I met people from a new religion, and I thought, oh no, more trouble.
Yes.
And they were members of something called the Baha'i Faith. And they were saying, the first thing that they said that really shocked me is they said the earth is one country and mankind is citizens. And I thought, wait a minute, that's my idea. I thought of it last week.
Yeah.
So the Baha'i Faith had started in 1844, so they had that on me, so that intrigued me. And I stayed in Limerick for a week going to these Baha'i meetings. They said there were 50 of them, but I didn't know if there were 50 in Limerick, 50 in Ireland, or 50 in the world. And I thought, well, maybe I can talk them out of it because, there's only 50, because they're only going to start another war.
Yeah.
But the more I hung out with them, the more I learned about it, I realized, no, these people aren't going to start a war. They actually are saying a whole lot of things I believe. There were no clergy in the Baha'i faith, and so I didn't have to worry about priests and stuff like that.
What a relief.
They believe that unity is the most important thing, and that the purpose of the Baha'i faith is to unite the world. And that made sense to me. The problem I had is that they believed in God.
Yeah.
I couldn't become a Baha'i because I didn't want to be a hypocrite. I didn't believe in God, and also they didn't drink. So I figured, okay, well, these are really nice people, and they were kind to me, and I needed kindness. But I said goodbye to them, and but I kept thinking about them.
Yeah.
And several months later, I was living in a commune in Cardiff, and as many people who are addicted go through, I hit the proverbial rock bottom. I literally woke up in the gutter in my own urine and decided I needed to change my life. I thought I could do that when I first got to Britain, but obviously didn't. And so here's how warped my thinking was. I thought I should kill myself. I should jump off the building. I was working on a construction site.
Right.
Or I should get my ear pierced. Or I should become a Baha'i. And I kept trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do? I get my ear pierced? No, I'll kill myself. No, I get my ear pierced. No, I'll become a Baha'i.
Big decisions.
So, fortunately, I didn't jump off the building.
Good.
Maybe I should have got my ear pierced. I don't know. I'm still thinking about it 50 years later.
Why not?
But I did become a Baha'i, and that became the transformative thing in my life that made me feel like I wasn't sinful, that I had a purpose. Oh, the other thing is that in the Baha'i faith, it says that art, poetry as part of art, can be prayer. And it never occurred to me that when I was trying to be a Catholic, that what I was writing, this poetry, these bad poems I was writing, could ever be prayerful. But in the Baha'i faith, they are prayer. They can be prayer, level of prayer. Not certainly all poems, but they could be. So it also gave me a purpose. The problem I had was that I drank, and I didn't want to be a hypocrite. But one of the Baha'is I met said that, if you believe this and you don't join, you're more of a hypocrite than if you don't join. If you believe it and don't join, you're more of a hypocrite than if you do join and can't live up to it as long as you're trying.
Yeah.
And so that gave me, I don't want to say hope, that might be too big a word, but the kick in the pants maybe to say, okay, let me try it.
Yeah.
And then, as I mentioned in the poem "The Stubborn Child" I read earlier, I felt like I rose out of the grave and was weak and half naked and covered with dirt, just trying to create this new life. And it was hard, but here I am 50 years later. I made it,
Wow.
I think.
It's a lot. All that you've been through, it's a heck of a lot for a human being to take, isn't it? A human life to take.
But, I think we can do more than we think we're capable of. I certainly did not think I was capable of much of what I did in my life. And I think the first brave thing I did in my life was leaving. That's going to sound ridiculous. Leaving my problems, running away from my problems, and going to a country I'd never been to, except as a baby.
Yeah.
I think about that, and, okay, I was running away, but it was also a brave thing to do. I could have gone to, Philadelphia from New York. I didn't have to go to Wales and go to a whole different country. So that was a brave thing to do.
Yes.
And then, staying there, even though it was cowardly, it was also kind of brave.
Absolutely.
And then it was also brave for me to say, okay, I don't know if I believe this God, but I'm going to try it anyway because it's better than what I'm working at. This idea that they have, these Baha'is, of a life I may not understand or agree with, but certainly could be better than what I'm doing now, because what I was doing wasn't working.
Yeah.
And so I think something inside me, maybe that urge I had as a child to want to do good, to want to believe in God, may have resurfaced at that point and said, hey, give this a shot.
Yes. Yeah, that sounds about right, doesn't it? And I think it's... I like when we spoke first, Peter, you spoke a little about the Baha'i faith, and you mentioned, you said God is an unknowable existence, and
right.
That really resonated with me, because no human being can. If we're the creation, we're never going to fully know the Creator, are we? With our limited...
Exactly, and that made so much sense to me when I heard that. It's like, okay, so that guy in the clouds throwing lightning bolts, I don't have to worry about him anymore.
Yeah, yes.
He's not, he doesn't have an abacus, or adding machine to all my sins. And
yeah.
Once I was able to get rid of that image, then it freed me up to believe in a kind of God that made more sense to me. And the crazy part is the kind of God that makes more sense to me is one I can't possibly understand.
Yes.
That makes more sense.
Yeah.
As you said, we're the creation. It's like a chair trying to understand the carpenter. How does that happen? Impossible.
It's absolutely right. And I think it's very arrogant to claim to know all the answers, isn't it? And to sort of think that we, you take an extreme version. You've got the Westboro Baptist who... they're the only ones that are going to be in heaven, and heaven's going to be a big place, and it's going to be pretty deserted. But it's, as I said...
One of the things I heard when I first met the Baha'is is that one of them said, we believe that we're right, but we believe everybody else is right, too.
Oh,
so that's when I heard that I didn't know, okay, these guys aren't going to start a war.
Yeah.
and the reason they say that is they believe that all of the religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and then the Eastern tradition, Hindu, Buddhist, and others, they all come from the same God, but they have different messengers, and the messengers are like different lamps.
Yeah.
But the light is the same. And they said the Baha'is believe in something called progressive revelation, where God sends these messengers every 1,000 years or so. I mean, it's approximate, to people to renew his spiritual teachings, and then to give social teachings for the times. So when we were talking earlier about needing priests perhaps earlier in our existence for when people didn't read, we don't need them now. The need now is for things like the equality of women and men, which is one of the Baha'i principles from 1840. Iran, that's where the Baha'i faith started, and one of their main teachings, the equality of women and men. Or universal education, so that there would not be a priest or a rabbi or a mullah. Every person was not just given the privilege, but responsible for deciding what is real, what is reality, deciding on this, looking at the world, looking at the teachings, looking at science, and deciding what is reality, what is true. And so we're forbidden to proselytize, so we don't go around converting people, because that's not our responsibility. Our responsibility is to basically change the world, make the world a better place by our lives, our examples, and by serving.
Yeah. That's it. That's what it's all about, isn't it? Showing the love of God.
Right.
Showing the love of God.
And that's the spiritual principle, but it changes in how we do that. And that's what we have to do. And maybe the world, can stop these wars eventually.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to think that it's sort of people think so. God not getting. Pulling his finger out or getting involved, but I like to think that he's sort of there at the end, he's going to wrap it all up and it's all going to be okay. And, and again, when you look at sort of what I find encouraging, near-death experiences where people, their lives are changed and they feel at this peace that because they know that it hasn't been a dream, they have passed to the other side and there's been no judgment or, hellish experiences. It's all very lovely. And I think we can spend our lives sort of worrying about... I'm still petrified of death, but I think we can sort of... I have a lovely picture. There's a photographer called Phil Koch, I think his name. I don't know if I pronounced his name right. And he takes all these photos of lovely sort of sunsets. And I've got this picture on my mantelpiece, Peter, of it's like a sunset sort of coming down on a... cornfield, and it's really beautiful. And I like to think that death is just literally going to sleep and you wake up and you're just there and you don't even know that you're dead, but that's just like the next chapter.
Ironically, that's how I felt as a child.
Yes.
I didn't know how I died because I had to be dead. But I was in hell. That's the problem.
Oh, this one's a nice
your cornfield with the sunset, the sun shining on it doesn't sound like it's a hell. It sounds kind of beautiful.
It's amazing. And I get the urge to want to, I think, when I'm doing that, I know I'm like talking on that at 50, but I get the urge to kick a ball around there. I don't know why. Maybe it's going back into childhood and the joy of kicking a ball or going on a swing. I think I'd like to kick a ball around. Maybe when I die, that's the truth, and I'm going to kick a ball around.
Yeah.
You never know. Oh,
It's an interesting metaphor. When my father's mother died, my grandmother, she died at 95, and my father's comment is, well, she had a good kick at the ball.
Oh, really? Was it?
And I thought that was a lovely way to describe her life.
Yes.
And the way you describe it there is that she probably is continuing in the afterlife.
Yeah. Why not? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, Peter, it's been lovely to to wrap this up. So you're in the process of writing your memoirs, or you've completed.
It's pretty much completed. I'm now about to go off and start looking for a publisher.
Great.
And the memoir is called Once Upon a Time You Lived in a Castle.
Once Upon a
Which
Time.
is, I've been working on it, as I mentioned, for about 10 years, and it's had lots of different titles. But I like that title for several reasons. The pub where my parents met in Wales during World War II is called the Windsor Castle Hotel in Newport. And literally I did live there for the first 3 years of my life. But it also resonates with the fairy tale kind of quality that some aspects of my life have. Once Upon a Time. And I mentioned I read the Grimm fairy tale poem earlier, so that's also been a big part of my life.
Yeah.
And particularly in America, castles are very exotic. Over where you are, you have the real ones.
Yeah.
But in America, that might be a selling point. Who knows?
Okay. Yeah.
Like we think of Walt Disney as the Disney castle as like what it's like, but they're much more beautiful in person than they are in real. I mean, I love the concrete. I visit so many castles particularly in Wales.
Yeah,
we have stone, and they try to imagine what it was like to live in them.
Yeah, I live about 20 minutes away from a castle that's very, very beautiful. There's something very, it's so old, and that, like you say, the concrete and the whole, it's very fascinating. Castles are fascinating, aren't they?
Yeah. So here's how stupid it was. When I first got to Wales, and I saw the Cardiff Castle, which was quite beautiful, I thought, oh, how brilliant the Welsh must have been to build these castles. And then I found out that, no, the Welsh didn't build them. The English built them to fight the Welsh. It's like, oh. So I revised my story. I said, okay, these Welsh people back then, they must have been really fierce for the English to have to build these castles.
Well, it's not that far away. It's pretty near, isn't it? Oh, Peter, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. And thank you so much for sharing of your story, which is really, tugging at the heartstrings, really. We're so proud of you for how far you've come. And it takes something to, you could either triumph or crumble, I think, with the life that you've had, and it's amazing that you've triumphed. And so is it okay if we have you have a website, if we have that link on the homepage?
Yeah, I do. Pardon me. There's I have several websites. The first is peteremurphy.com, and that's my personal. But then I run writing workshops and conferences in the United States as well as in Britain and in Spain, at least pre-pandemic. I hope to get back there soon. And that's murphywriting.com. And we offer workshops online since COVID as well as in person. We're having a very big one in 2 weeks, the 28th annual Winter Poetry and Prose Getaway.
Oh, great.
Just outside of Atlantic City, New Jersey.
Yeah.
And that's how I got started in the conference business. It was an accident. I would go away on weekends to write, and people said, I wish I could go with you. And so I started inviting a couple of people to come with me, and it grew into this huge conference that's held every year. So.
Wow.
And I grew to the other ones, other places that we'd write. We're doing another one in Florida in March, and up and down the east coast of the United States. And then we were hoping to be back in Europe this summer, but we decided not to with the COVID situation. It's still too difficult to travel.
It's hard,
unpredictable.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Well, wish you all the best with that, and we'll have those links featured on the homepage. And,
thank you, Deborah. That's very kind.
Oh, well, thank you so much again, Peter, and thank you to the audience for tuning in. And until next time, much love and God bless.